อจากนี้นะคะจะเป็นการบรรยายพิเศษที่น่าสนใจมากๆในวันนี้อีกหัวข้อหนึ่งค่ะซึ่งเราได้รับเกียรติจากคุณโทมัส ทอมสันนะคะหัวหน้าฝ่ายความร่วมมือทางยุทธศาสตร์สำนักงานห่วงโซ่อุปทานจาก World Food Program หรือโครงการอาหารโลกนะคะ World Food Program เป็นหน่วยงานให้ความช่วยเหลือด้านอาหารขององค์การสหประชาชาติและเป็นองค์การด้านมนุษยธรรมที่ใหญ่ที่สุดในโลกนะคะซึ่งดำเนินการจัดการลดปัญหาความหิวโหยทั่วโลกโดยมีสำนักงานใหญ่อยู่ที่กรุงโรมประเทศอิตาลีนะคะในวันนี้นะคะคุณโทมัส ทอมสันให้เกียรติบรรยายในหัวข้อเรื่องโครงการอาหารโลกกับการปฏิบัติหลังการเก็บเกี่ยวในห่วงโซ่อุปทานด้านมนุษยธรรมค่ะหากท่านมีคำถามสามารถพิมพ์ส่งมาในเว็บ Webinar Q&A Box ของการประชุมได้เลยนะคะแล้วเราจะส่งต่อคำถามให้กับท่านวิทยากรต่อไปค่ะ
Well, from now on, we will proceed to another special talk. In this regard, we have received the great honor from Mr. Thomas Thompson. He is the Chief of Strategic Engagement, Supply Chain Office, the World Food Program. The World Food Program is the world's largest humanitarian organization that acts as the food assistance branch to the United Nations. It was founded in 1961, and since then, the organization focused on global hunger and food security. And today, Mr. Thompson will give us a special talk in the topic of post-harvest practices in humanitarian supply chain. Mr. Thompson, from now, the stage is yours.
Just a quick check. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. Sawadika, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry that's the extent of my Thai, so the rest of this presentation will be in English. You've given a fairly good introduction to who we are, but my intent is to go through a handful of slides with you this morning. First, to explain to you who the World Food Program is, why post-harvest loss interventions are important, and a little bit of the impact it can possibly have, and then also how a few examples of how we're going to achieve this, or how we're achieving it in various parts of the world. So who we are, you pointed this out quite well, that we are the food assistance branch of the United Nations. And we're also the world's largest humanitarian organization. We focus on food and hunger related issues. We focus primarily on emergency interventions. You've heard about the floods in Pakistan in the last few days. That's the kind of thing that the World Food Program intervenes with on a regular basis. But we are involved in longer term development issues and shortfalls of food, chronic food insecurity in a number of countries, and trying to seek solutions to these problems. So through our emergency interventions, on any given day, this slide we have in front of you, it means that we are using about 100 aircraft to deliver food, either through lifting or even dropping it out of foods under very extreme situations. We drop food from airplanes. It means that we have about 30 ships loading in 60 different locations and discharging in about 75 locations. In terms of trucking, we have on any given day about 5,600 trucks that we have leased to deliver for us, and about 800 of those are actually WFP owned trucks. We have 35 fleet workshops around the world and 650 food warehouses around the world. So these are, primarily in developing and chronically food insecure countries, but it's a very, very large footprint indeed. And this is what gives us this kind of experience. Okay. The way we intervene in post-harvest losses is by looking at these sort of four major areas of interventions, and the four areas of expertise that we've gained over the years in the kind of work we do. In planning for our deliveries, for food procurement, and also goods and service procurement, but we're talking about food here. Transport, and this is by sea, land, both and for storing our commodities, in warehousing and pre-positioning of commodities. This is super important as well, so things don't have to be or can be used delivered in a timely and cost-efficient manner, and as well as in humanitarian response hubs for which emergency interventions can be carried out. Again, the unique advantages of WFP in doing this work is that we've got 60 years of expertise since 1961, again, predominantly in developing countries. And most of our expertise is in emergency response. However, the fact that we're working in so many locations that have chronic food insecurity have led us to become more expertise, or gain more expertise and longer term interventions. It's also brought us into extremely close relationships with governments around the world who see us as a close partner for doing the work that we do. We also have, through this work, developed a huge number of staff that work in the field, most of them from the countries that we're working in. So we've gained a lot of expertise over the number of years. The humanitarian impact is of course the reason why we're involved in this. With a global population of 7.8 billion people and an expected 9.7 billion people by 2050, there's a huge shortfall in the amount of people who require food, and there's been a lot of effort made in increasing production of food around the world. And so much of the focus has been on increasing production of food so that there's enough food commodities. However, it's not quite working because of the amount of food that's actually lost in production and in post-production. So there's an estimate of that 1/3 of the food that's produced for human consumption is actually wasted and lost along food supply chains. This is actually enough to close the gap on the hunger gap. So it's a huge problem that we could avoid having to produce extra food just by saving the food that we've already lost. I mean, clearly there's some huge environmental impacts to this as well. By not having to increase your production, you are lowering your carbon footprint as well. So there's an environmental issue that goes with carbon footprint, use of water, use of land mass, etc. So if we're to achieve zero hunger, which is an SDG 2 target, post-harvest loss management is one of the biggest priorities, one of the biggest areas where we can make a huge difference in this. One of our, the biggest collaborators we have for this are actually with governments themselves. In many places, the governments are asking us to be involved in this. In some places, our expertise is in supply chain strengthening, is allowing us to do this work directly with the governments. And where the commercial capacity doesn't exist in many of these locations, WFP is able to step in and take the place of the commercial sector. And the intent is to do this only temporarily while capacity exists, or capacity is brought to bear. There are the two major areas where we have focus actors and focus commodities, and so who we actually work with to decrease post-harvest losses are mostly smallholder farmers, and then smallholder buyers, aggregators, people who collate on crops, and logistics service providers, retailers, and consumers. Now, we focus on smallholder farmers because in developing countries, this can represent up to 80% of the food that's being produced. So larger countries, more developed countries, very, very big companies are involved in this. They're commercially oriented, so they manage to reduce their own losses. Smallholder farmers generally don't have the kind of inputs required to make this happen, and this is where we're trying to step in. The focused commodities, cereals, pulses, vegetable oils, nutritious fruits, vegetables, root, animal, and fishery products, we primarily focus on the first half of that, cereals and pulses and vegetable oils. Some of the other issues we're stepping into through school feeding programs, and I'll show you one example of a post-harvest loss technique we use in a dry country fresh foods as well, which typically we're not delivering. So in terms of achievements and places we're working, I mean, WFP works in about 80 countries around the world, and about, I think we're inputting food for about 114 million people. Post-harvest interventions we're working for in about 34 countries. So, you know, almost half of the places that we actually do emergency work, we're also doing work, we're starting to do work on post-harvest loss work. So this represents, you know, nearly 1 million smallholder farmers, with a large number of groups being supported as well in this. We are doing post-harvest handling and loss reduction training, strengthening of knowledge of local systems and actors to produce improved practices in storage. We have people that are, we're working with people to increase standards for food safety. And then a lot of this has to do with packaging and transportation as well. A big part of this is actually drying and storage, which I'll show you in some of our examples as well, in terms of trying to reduce the post-harvest losses. A big part of it also is rehabilitating old and damaged storage facilities. The provision of equipment, and a good example of that is hermetically sealed bags, which can keep crops from degrading while they're being stored. And part of that storage allows these smallholder farmers to sell their crops at a different market cycle, so they can actually increase the price of those commodities as well. In terms of partnerships, our partnerships are, while they're with other UN agencies and international organizations, FAO is the Food and Agriculture Organization. IFAD does agricultural financing. We also work with Help Logistics. There are various centers of excellence in West Africa, China, and Brazil that we work with. A lot of the work is done with local government partners. We try to put it into our planning now when we're having a discussion about a strategic plan with a particular country, that we want to have post-harvest loss be considered as one of the interventions that we do with the country over a period of years. And this is simply to try to decrease the gap of increased food production that might be required, or increase food assistance that may be required to import. So all of this together, we're hoping to try to close the gap on losses. There's also the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research that we work with. We try to do South-South triangular cooperation, introducing best practices from different regions. And we certainly work with the private sector in these areas as well. We have some examples of best practices for post-harvest food loss reductions. We have, I think, 4 or so examples to give you of things that we've got ongoing right now. The first example we have is from Burkina Faso. And in this case, we have a lot of storage and transport losses. And so we're working on doing the training with farmers in terms of managing those losses. A lot of it has to do with transforming and changing the way that food is stored, because of the rest we discovered that a lot of the food was stored was lost in storage there. So in this case, we've introduced, and I think you see it on some of your slide there, large PVC water tanks that we change them into small grain silos. And by sealing them off, we keep the insects out of them as well. So once cargo can be successfully dried, it can be placed into a sealed container, and that keeps the insects from destroying. Polyethylene bags as well, with heavy-duty zippers, and their airtight zippers have made a big impact as well. There is another thing that's been experimented with as well in terms of keeping insects out is using polyethylene bags that have some insecticide incorporated into the bags, which helps them keep insect-free while the commodity is being transported. So this is another area that is being looked at. The second example we have is from Afghanistan, and this is a lot has been done with training people to use international food safety standards. In this case, we found that there was a lack of people who had knowledge and experience in the area of quality control. So desegregating crops has been an ongoing problem in Afghanistan. And so by increasing the ability for laboratories to monitor the food quality and providing the training and equipment needed for inspection and grading of commodities has been very important. And so the international standard of Codex has been introduced to many of the inspectors, so they have an understanding of what they're working with. So a lot of it's been lab support and setting up procedures for labs and equipment, as well as making sure there's enough food inspectors for food and safety. So in Afghanistan, a slightly different set of problems, and again, this becomes part and parcel of the work that we'll do. Is we'll figure out in a particular country where the biggest gain can be had towards decreasing food losses. Post-harvest loss in Afghanistan, in Rwanda, is our third example. And what was discovered in Rwanda is a lot of the issues were about aflatoxin in the maize crops. And it's been an extremely large problem there, and a lot of their crop is lost every year to aflatoxin contamination. And a lot of that has to do with the way the commodity is dried, the way it's threshed, and the way it's stored. So the training has focused on those areas in terms of drying. You can see a drying shed behind you, so that crops can be thoroughly dried. Moisture in corn crops. Corn comes harvested with a particularly high moisture content, and so drying is extremely important for maize crops. So we've been working a lot with communities to increase grain aggregation as well. So how the commodity is brought together to be sold, making sure that it remains dry through these methods we've introduced. And then there's another technology that has been introduced as well that removes aflatoxin from contaminated cargoes. So you're able to actually, if you've got a small quantity of a small amount of aflatoxin, it can poison an entire batch of cargo. However, if you're able to successfully go through this and remove only the aflatoxin tainted commodity, you can recover a very, very large portion of that commodity, up to 90%. And so that is another way of massively increase your cargo output without bringing any higher production or more importations of commodity. There's the fourth example. I think we have 5 examples here. The fourth example is of best practices is Zambia, food safety and quality, and farmer. And again, this comes back to farmer training. So we've made a very large impact in Zambia by training smallholder farmers, half of which are female. A huge number of government extension staff have been trained as well. And again, this is another case where the distribution of hermetically sealed bags and the ability to do food inspections has made a big impact on the country. It's another place as well where larger grain storage, including silage improvements, have had a very positive impact on reducing post-harvest losses. So this is Zambia is another place that we think can produce more than enough food for its own country without bringing more food into the country if we can reduce the post-harvest losses. Again, I don't have the numbers on how much that would save in terms of a carbon footprint, but as you can imagine, not having to import and not having to increase production simply by saving what you've already produced will have a massive impact. The last example I've got for you today is one that is an area that we don't often work in as much. You can see the woman putting carrots into her cool box. We generally don't work a whole lot with fresh foods, and this is a technology that works generally only in very dry countries. But Malawi is a place that has very little electricity, and so saving fresh commodities, especially more sensitive fruits and vegetables, is extremely difficult because of the lack of electricity and cooling. However, the air is very dry in Malawi, and so a solution to this is using a fennec cooler, which simply uses water evaporation at the external parts of the cooler to keep the interior parts cold. You can keep fresh fruits and vegetables inside that. So again, this is a particular technology that works in places that are only very, very dry, but it's one that requires no electricity at all and is very, very effective at reducing spoilage and waste of fresh commodities. So these are sort of 5 different areas. I think that's our last example. Yes, that's our last example of best practices we've introduced in various countries and the progress that we're making in these countries as well. So I've got Lily Jensen with me here as well, and if we've got any broad questions, I'm quite happy to field those now. More technical questions, we may have to come back to you with more complete answers, but please feel free to ask us anything now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, for very interesting presentation about the work that WFP have been done and the contribution that you and the organization contribute throughout the years. And we have questions from the floor, and we will raise the questions first in Thai, and then I will translate to English later.
Okay, thank you.
มีคำถามจากท่านผู้เข้าร่วมการประชุมนะคะจากที่คุณโทมัส ทอมสันนะคะได้ให้ความรู้กับเราเกี่ยวกับการลดการสูญเสียหลังการเก็บเกี่ยวในผลทางการเกษตรในประเทศที่อาจจะยากไร้แล้วก็กำลังพัฒนานะคะการให้คำแนะนำและให้ความรู้แก่เกษตรกรรายย่อยสามารถช่วยลดการสูญเสียหลังการเก็บเกี่ยวได้มากน้อยแค่ไหนคะ
Well, regarding the questions, as you mentioned that the World Food Program focused on the reduction of post-harvest loss in several developing countries, and then you focus on the smallholder farmers. Can you clarify us again why you focus on the smallholder farmers, and how about the successfulness of the post-harvest loss reduction? Was the number decrease rapidly or slightly decrease, something like that?
Okay, I'll take the first part of it. The focus on smallholder farmers is because in more developing contexts, that is where most of the food is produced, is in smallholder farmers. So in countries that are least developed, you have the smallholder farmers are producing most of the food of the country. It's like up to 80% is smallholder farmers in many of these places. So the greatest particular area of gain for us would be with these farmers. They tend to be the least well paid. They have the most to gain. And so for us, in reducing the overall food deficit for the country, that's the area for us to focus on. Large holder farmers are typically larger businesses, and they have more resources and often more knowledge on how to reduce their own post-harvest losses. Because they are a large business, that really does represent a financial loss to them. So they tend to invest more money in those areas. In terms of success, I think we're a little bit early in the process to have a complete understanding of what success we have. I think anecdotally we've shown that in the poorest places we've had the biggest impact. I might be able to try to come back with you. We might be able to write with you later with some more specifics on that. I don't have them with me right now. But like I say, I couldn't really answer to that at this point. We're trying to do some value chain assessment work in this regard, but I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are. Anecdotally, we have made improvements, but I don't know what they are in terms of actual tonnage at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. This is clear a lot of things up, and we still have a few questions from the floor.
ค่ะขอบคุณทั้งคำถามและคำตอบแรกนะคะมีคำถามเพิ่มเติมนะคะ อยากให้คุณโทมัสนะคะให้คำจำกัดความของคำว่า food loss และ food waste ว่ามีความเหมือนหรือแตกต่างกันอย่างไรค่ะ
Well, that we see that you told us about over 1/3 of the total production consider the food loss and food waste. So this is a large amount of food that we produce, and about 30%, more than 30% we lost and waste. Can you define the difference between food loss and food waste, or it is the same thing, or what is the breaking point between those two categories?
I'm not really sure if I can differentiate between food lost and food. Well, I mean, food loss for me would be post-harvest loss in terms of food that spoils before it reaches market. Food waste would be typically things that are from the user, from the end user. So you receive it as a commodity, and you don't cook all of your food well, or you throw some waste. So that's sort of post-consumer loss rather than post-harvest loss. So the focus really, I guess, for us is food losses rather than food waste. We recognize that commercial entities often waste food, stores often waste food, but we're really concerned is what happens between the harvest of a crop and the delivery to a person who might be consuming that food. And we've not focused on the food loss so much after it's reached the beneficiary or the person who's going to consume the food. There's a huge incentive for people at that point to also retain their food and use every last little bit of it.
Yes, I see. Thank you very much, sir.
คำถามต่อไปนะคะมีคำถามจากผู้เข้าร่วมการประชุมว่าในส่วนของ World Food Program นะคะมีส่วนช่วยเหลือในระหว่างที่การเกิดสงครามเช่นสงครามยูเครนหรือในระหว่างที่เกิดสาธารณภัยต่างๆไม่ว่าจะเป็นแผ่นดินไหวน้ำท่วมอะไรพวกนี้หรือเปล่านะคะ
Well, does the World Food Program give a hand in the food crisis during such natural disasters such as earthquake and some other flood, something like that, or in the case of some political crisis like the war in the Ukraine, does the World Food Program also assist in this food regards?
In fact, that's most of what we do. I think we're coming to some of the post-harvest loss issues because we've been doing that kind of work, and we're seeing the potential for doing good. But primarily, what the World Food Program does is intervene in exactly those kind of crises. They're political crises, environmental crises, tsunamis, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes. Conflict is another one that we intervene with, and obviously conflict is the most heartbreaking. But these are the things that we do day in and day out. And through our work with chronically food insecure countries, then comes in our food with, in terms of providing school meals assistance, in places that are so poor that they can't have all of their children go to school. We try to help with that. And then also then into the post-harvest losses as well to try to reduce their deficit. But you're absolutely right. Most of what we do is that sort of crisis area.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. That's very useful for us in terms of the post-harvest loss reduction and the crisis happened, and then the World Food Program also help to alleviate this problem for all times. And so since the time is up, and then it would be all for this session. We gratefully thank for your kind presentation, and we hope in the future we can work collaboratively in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.